Welcome to today's virtual talk, Voting for All, a conversation with Aram Han Sifuentes. I am Adele Lander Burke, Vice President of Public Programs at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. The Skirball is guided by the Jewish value of welcoming the stranger, and we are inspired by American ideals of democratic ideals of freedom and equality. We present exhibitions and public programs designed to foster human connections and call upon us all to build a more just society. In anticipation, and who isn't, of the upcoming 2020 election, we are proud to present our first online digital exhibition, the official Unofficial Voting Station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't, created by artist-activist Aram Han Sifuentes. Visit the exhibition at skirball.org. Today, Aram will join in conversation with Skirball exhibition curator Laura Mart. They will share insights on Aram's nationwide project to raise awareness of voter disenfranchisement and capture the voices of those unable to vote in the U.S. elections. I now welcome Aram Han Sifuentes and Laura Mart. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Adele. Thank you, Laura, for being. All right, so my goal as an artist is to disrupt, unsettle, and rupture dominant narrative to assert, demand, and claim space for those who are commonly other, particularly for immigrants of color. We are never, never other, especially in this moment of widespread national and international xenophobia and hate. We have to push back on multiple fronts in as many ways as we can. So as an artist and arts educator, I'm constantly asked, how can art create change? What is the impact of art in social change? So over the years, I've been writing notes in an attempt to answer this question, and I'll intermittently make points throughout the lecture. They are particularly intended to respond to the concerns of BIPOC artists, and my thoughts on this are constantly ongoing and evolving. So rather than a comprehensive list, this is a constellation of thoughts and realizations. So the first important point is telling our stories. So through art and music, writing, we have the power to tell our own stories. These stories are often not told, actively forgotten, or suppressed, perverted, distorted, and oversimplified by dominant culture. Through art, we tell our own stories through our lived experiences and truths on our own terms. So I learned to sew when I was 6 years old, and that was the year we moved to the United States from South Korea. So my parents came here without knowing what they would do for work. And luckily, someone in the small Korean community in the Central Valley in California hired them to work at their dry cleaning business. So these are my father's hands. He works the machines, cleaning, pressing, spotting, and ironing. And my mom hems and alters clothes. So my parents were able to open up their own dry cleaning store, and they still do this work today. So these are my mom's hands. She was actually formerly an artist and arts educator in Korea, which is interesting, right? So my parents work 12 to 13 hours a day at work, 6 days a week, and my mom always brings sewing home with her. And they've been doing this for over 27 years now. So we'll sit in the living room after dinner, watch TV as my mom will work on her alterations. And if I want to spend any time with my mom, it meant sitting and sewing with her. So we would all contribute by ripping seams, ripping out bad zippers, sewing on buttons, and mending rips and holes of other people's clothes. And this is where I learned to sew. And it is from here, from the beginning, where sewing became political for me and linked to my identity. And I'll always see sewing from this place, inside this living room, sewing with my family to make a living as immigrants in this country. So with these questions, or here in this living room, I started to collect my mom's jean cuff remnants. She cuts, she hems a lot of jeans. So in Chicago, I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago to get my master's in fiber and material studies. So away from my mom, I wanted to visit those who do the same type of work in Chicago to question what we share and how others came to do this type of work. So I started to visit tailors and seamstresses in Chicago and collected their scraps. So the lure of the American dream draws many immigrants who arrive who already know or quickly find out that their employment options are limited. Many end up getting jobs that offer low wages, requires repetitive manual labor, or are sometimes hazardous with no union or collective bargaining protections. So these tailors and seamstresses, like my mom, are working long and tedious hours and oftentimes take extra work home or to places where work is unregulated. So immigrants who are granted visas and green cards are usually highly educated and skilled. So why are these nurses, businesswomen, graphic designers, bankers, artists, and teachers finding themselves sewing jeans for $10 to $20 a piece for over 12 hours a day? Some say my parents should be appreciative of the opportunities given to them. I don't see it this way. I see it as an exploitation of immigrants to keep the cost of handwork and manual labor low in this country. It brings me to my second point, which is art is powerful in how it can recenter or centering, how it could shift the frame. So by telling our stories, we shift the frame and put ourselves in the center. We live in a society where most things are defined by whiteness. So when we tell stories and truths from our own perspective, we rupture white narratives and define ourselves and our experiences to ourselves and our communities. So where that first project this project, the US Citizenship Test Sampler, asked the question, who should be granted citizenship and how do they prove themselves? So I use the word sampler because during colonial America, during the 18th and 19th century, school teachers would use samplers to teach young children as young as 5 or 6 to embroider numbers and alphabets onto fabric, right? So in that way, these children were able to learn basic educational concepts. And then some adolescent girls, generally from wealthy families that were able to continue their education, would create a second sampler. And this second sampler was to show off the values of the girl to her the values of the girl and her family to potential suitors. So essentially showing her worth as a wife. So this project, the US Citizenship Test Sampler, riffs off a traditional sampler. So I'm stitching the 100 questions and answers of the citizenship test onto this piece of linen. So for the actual test, there's 100 questions you have to study. They pick 10. You have to get 6 or more correct, and it's actually an oral test, right? So this embroidery is being made. It's 8.5 inches wide and about 25 feet long. I started this project for practical motivations. I wasn't a citizen and I had to learn the test material for the citizenship test. So this project follows 5 main guidelines. So number 1, to sell the sampler for the cost of applying for citizenship. So I sold it in 2017 and then it costed $680. And actually now the cost to apply for citizenship, it was supposed to go up October 2nd to $1,170, but it's that fee increase is on pause at the moment. So number 2, to log my hours of stitching the sampler. So I sold it for $680. I was on question 53. I put in about 300 hours. So I made $2 per hour. Number 3, to apply for citizenship only if my sampler sells. So by making my application for citizenship contingent on the sale of the sampler, I was letting other people decide if I've proven my worthiness of becoming a citizen. And with the sale of my sampler, I became a citizen. 4, to engage other non-citizens to each stitch one of the civics questions and answers. So each of these are 8.5 by 11 on linen again. Number 5, to exhibit and sell the sampler. So each work is on sale for the cost of applying for citizenship. So like I said, currently either $725 or $1,170. And the full amount goes to the maker of the sold sampler. So in the beginning, I only would ask participants to stitch the question and answer. However, one of my first participants asked me if he could add more because he didn't think it would sell for $680. So since then, many sampler makers have been adding pictorial elements of their own choosing and making judgments of their own invested work and time. So currently there are about 120 completed samplers, and these samplers are exhibited together to display the collective value of this community of non-citizens. So in some instances, I work one-on-one with participants based on their individual and their educational needs to pass the naturalization test. I become a private tutor for both English and the civics questions. So I've been facilitating these citizenship ready workshops at nonprofit organizations, community centers, and schools all over the US, where communities of non-citizen immigrants come together to learn the citizenship test material through the act of sewing. And the sampler workshops organically become these grassroots roundtable discussions addressing immigrant rights, labor politics, and everyday concerns of intergenerational or multi-ethnic people. It's interesting because some see the act of non-citizens studying American history and government through a traditionally American craft as patriotic, while others interpret this project as politically confrontational, where the act of stitching these samplers by non-citizens represents a confrontation of a text that is inherently condescending of the immigrant community, and sewing is a gesture linked to the types of work that immigrants currently do. And in this way, the politics of the project exist simultaneously as patriotic and as political dissent and critique. It subverts a critique of the US immigration and naturalization laws and the vulnerability of immigrants navigating their way through the process. I mean, first of all, the citizenship test is ridiculous. So USA News did a study in 2012 that showed that 1 in 3 Americans failed the citizenship test. I picked a generous test because some of the other ones actually showed that 2 in 3 fail. So, and this comes up every workshop, right? Why do I have to know who the president was during World War I to prove that I'm worthy of citizenship? Or how many members there are in the House of Representatives? Or what year the Constitution was written? What does the rule of law even mean? And as individuals and as a community, we non-citizens do not have the freedom to voice our protests of the conditions put upon us as immigrants without fear of repercussions. And we can see this happening in this administration, right? The laws protecting immigrants can be quite precarious and fragile. So this is a political project that deals with questions of time, labor, work, economy, capitalism, and patriotism. From start to finish, it's about reclaiming the historical act of making samplers. And the act of making samplers in it of themselves was about assessing value, the value of the skills of the woman making them. And that assessment of handwork is lost in this industrial age where embroidery and handcrafts are made by so-called invisible laborers. So this project aims to reclaim this tradition, and it's reclaiming it for the racialized immigrant working class. Immigrants often do not have time or access to make art. So for example, most of the organizations and schools that I've been doing these workshops at make it clear to me that they don't do arts and craft programs, that each and every workshop needs to fulfill educational components. So it's a policy that makes it clear that immigrants are always expected to work to prove ourselves. So why teach immigrants how to do arts and crafts when they need to spend that time to study English or computers or work toward their citizenship? So in this project, I create this space for non-citizens where we could sew, make art together, and make money from our work. So it leads me to my third point of the power of art, right? Which links to the previous two. By telling our own stories and centering ourselves, we claim space. We become visible. Representation is I see you, I am you, you're not alone, you're important, we are proud. There's something profoundly powerful about seeing the many nuances and complexities of your stories and your experiences reflected back to you. It's a sigh of momentary relief, then we fight for more. So pushing back, talking back to power. So this is one of my favorite uses of art, to talk back to power. So as mentioned before, vulnerable communities such as non-citizen immigrants don't have the freedom and space to talk back to power without fear of reprisal. So art can create this space under the guise of creativity. Leads me perfectly to my next project, the Protest Banner Lending Library. So this project I started this on November 9th, 2016, following the results of the 2016 presidential election. And on that day, protests erupted all over the nation, and I started making protest banners and started to invite people to make the banners with me. So at the same time, organizations asked me to facilitate banner making workshops for the public, and this is how the project Protest Banner Lending Library began. So I would say the first part of this project are these free public workshops where people learn how to make their own protest banners in really simple steps using fusible web. So no sewing required, just cutting and ironing. I did a couple workshops, virtual workshops with this Skirball. And I have a photo tutorial of it on the Facebook page and my website. But each banner takes about an hour and a half or 2 hours to make. This workshop skills sharing component has become really increasingly or become importantly pedagogical. The workshops in the space that they create address people's immediate desires to create banners for themselves and others to use in protests. It also places the skill of making protest banners in the hands of participants, where they have the skills to continue making them for themselves and their communities and for their art practices. So these workshops have become such an important part of my practice because it is where I am nourished. I feel immense joy and power when I make art with my communities. In many non-Euro-Western cultures, art is made collectively, not by an individual. Making art together creates spaces for our knowledge, connected through lived experiences, to be shared and uplifted. These spaces of collective making become radical spaces to talk, listen, validate each other, share stories and resources, learn about the self and others, and playfully come up with strategies to live and fight. So the second part of the project is a physical lending library of these banners. So it quickly turned into a library because many of the people making banners with me are my friends, family, neighbors, many of who are non-citizens and undocumented immigrants who fear going to protest and don't feel safe in those spaces. So in this way, we were all making banners, but we couldn't take them out ourselves. So I turned the project into a lending library of these banners, where those who feel unsafe going to protests could donate their made banners to this library where others can check out and use. So in this way, even if we cannot physically attend a protest, our voices are still heard. And those who check out the banners become an ally, co-conspirators to these vulnerable communities. And with our collection of banners, we've done several residencies where we have open hours to the public. In February to May 2017, we took on a public residency at the Chicago Cultural Center, where Veronica Casado Hernandez, Ishita Jarap, and Tabitha Ann Kunkis joined me, and we were opening the library to the public for 24 hours a week for people to come make banners, check out, and return banners. And as part of our residencies and workshops, we also collect slogans and suggestions for slogans, because honestly, this is the hardest part of making a banner. So at the end of that residency at the Cultural Center, we had over 6,000 cards, and it became our inspiration wall. It was, I really enjoyed seeing conversations develop on the wall. It was like sort of watching a physical Facebook thread, right? So there were a lot that had conversations with each other, like this, All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. I like this one, the Give Trump a Chance, no, agreed, double agreed, triple agreed, quadruple agreed. So our residency at the Chicago Cultural Center took place at a time where there were just multiple protests happening every week. So this site really became a hub for people to meet and make or check out banners before going to protest. So this group was a group that came in before heading to DC for the Native Nations Rise March in March of 2017. So once people make these banners, they always have the option to take it or donate it to the project. I always stress that use is of most importance. So if you're going to use it, then take it. If not, consider donating it to the library for others to use. And we often have people who make them, use them, and then donate them to the library afterwards. So the question comes up a lot of why fabric banners, right? So fabric banners have some advantages to paper and cardboard posters. Fabric banners are generally easier to transport. Many people hold them, put them on dowels, or just wear them as capes or aprons, and recently draped on cars, right? The second advantage of fabric banners is that they last longer generally than posters, and can be reused many times. In this way, it's a little pessimistic, but we're going to be fighting these causes for a long time. So we have a rough estimate that more than 2,000 banners have been made in our workshops, and we have over 600 banners collectively in different protest banner lending libraries in cities all over the US and beyond. And they're constantly being checked out. And when someone does check banners out, we usually take down the people's email addresses, ask them to use the hashtag protest banner lending library, and to return it once they're done using it so other people can check them out to use. And when they get returned, we ask people where they've taken them and used them. And that was interesting for me and something sort of unexpected, because I anticipated protest marches, political actions, but they get used in pretty interesting ways. So this is Free Street Theater. They borrow banners for their youth production, theater production. So like I said, they get checked out for protests, marches, political actions, but also conferences, public talks, presentations, performances, retreats, exhibitions, schools, classrooms, fundraiser events, parties. And sometimes people just tell me they put it up in their room. We do not have a time frame for people to return the banners, and we don't implement late fees. So some banners never come back, some come back damaged, and that's all okay. It's also been interesting to look through media coverage of the protests that happen nationwide and how often we find our banners in the photographs. So this is a photo from the Chicago Trans Liberation March from a few years ago. And this is important to me just to think about how the visual impact of the banners, as well as that people are encountering art in these public spaces, on the streets, and on the pages of newspapers. And of course, widely on social media, the words and these banners have a growing history. They're made by someone, used in a protest, returned to the library, and then taken by someone else to a different protest. The banners carry the histories of the hands that made them, hold them, and the places where they have traveled. So this is one of my favorite uses or of the banners as well, is by there was a Home is Here march to defend DACA and TPS in October and November of 2019, where many different immigrant rights organizations, including NACASAC, who I work with quite often, NACASAC checked out about 20 banners and walked them from New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and DC. So jumping into the next project, as mentioned before, I've only recently become a naturalized citizen. So in 2016, even though I had lived in the United States for more than 24 years, I wasn't able to vote. So during these presidential elections, so much that was at stake circles around immigration policy. So I really wanted to be able to vote and have a say in what would so greatly impact the safety of my family, friends, neighbors, and communities. So I started to question who can't legally vote in the United States. So this is the list from largest to smallest groups, and there's 5 groups. So youth under 18, non-citizens. And then it gets messy pretty quickly here, right? Because it's incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, depending on what state they're from or where they live. And so the Sentencing Project in 2016 estimated that 6.1 million people couldn't legally vote due to the laws that disenfranchise citizens convicted of felony offenses. So felony disenfranchisement rates vary by state, and as states institute a wide range of disenfranchisement policies. So like I said, these laws depend state to state. So if we take a closer look here, in some states such as Maine and Vermont, incarcerated people can vote. In 18 states, incarcerated people lose their right to vote when they're in prison, but once they're out, they're able to vote again. In 3, it's prison parole, which California is there. And in 17 states, it's one has to finish prison parole and probation to regain voting rights. In 11 states, the laws are much stricter. In some states, you lose your right to vote forever. So for example, in Kentucky, the governor is the only one who could restore your voting rights. The ex-offender must complete an application and is up to the governor to accept or deny the application. Anyone convicted of a felony in Virginia automatically loses their civil rights, the right to vote, serve on a jury, run for office, become a notary public, and carry a firearm. The Constitution of Virginia gives the governor the sole discretion to restore civil rights, not including firearm rights. So as you can see, it's very specific to each state. So felony disenfranchisement policies disproportionately impact communities of color, particularly Black and Brown communities. So as of 2016, in 4 states, more than 1 in 5 Black adults are disenfranchised. In total, 2.2 million Black citizens are banned from voting. So the Sentencing Project, that's where that's from. And if you'd like more information on this, that is really a great resource. So the 4th largest disenfranchised community are residents of US territory. So people born in Guam, the Virgin Islands, Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico are all Americans. They vote in the US congressional elections and presidential primaries, but Americans born in these territories can't vote for president, not unless they move to the mainland, except for American Samoans who are not US citizens. They are only considered US nationals. And then the 5th group are those without specific IDs, again, depending on the ID requirements of your state, right? So if you don't have that specific ID, then you can't vote. So I wasn't quite sure what the total percentage of people who can't legally vote was in 2016 until this came out. So this is the data from the US Election Project, which it estimates 28.6% of the population was ineligible to vote in 2016. So that's about 92 million people. We don't have the exact updated number for the 2020 elections due to the constant changing of laws. And this list and percentage does not even address voter suppression. Which takes me to another point with art and the power of art. Art is the language of imagination. Art allows us to imagine and present alternate pasts, presents, and futures. Through art, we can see our imagination come to fruition. I use art in this way to create socially engaged projects that reimagine what civic engagement can look like if it were truly made accessible to all. I create things that I want to see or want to be true, like voting for all. So in 2016, I connected with the Jane Addams Hull House Museum in Chicago, who commissioned the first iteration of the project, Unofficial Voting Station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't. So between September 8th and November 8th of 2016, I collaborated with over 15 artists, activists, organizations, and we created more than 25 different voting stations all over the US and in Mexico. Each of these voting stations took on different forms. Some were performative, used as pedagogical tools. public interactive artworks, events, guerrilla actions. And it wasn't meant to be a scientific demographic undertaking, but a series of interconnected gestures meant to empower disenfranchised people. So performance artist, co-founder of La Pocha Nostra, Roberto Sifuentes, he had his students in his performance class called Border Crossers at the School of the Art Institute to create their own voting stations. So here, Jesus, Hilario, and Frida, they use the ballots to turn themselves into a walking ballot station, human piñata. Another example is Cecilia Aguilar Castillo and Eric Fernandez Saldana, who live in Mexico City. They did a station in Mexico City, Tijuana, and Acapulco. So their station was very performative. So you would come and vote on the official, unofficial ballots with fake blood. You would vote for the candidate. And then they had opportunities where you could vote against the candidate. So they had these styrofoam heads and sharp objects. And this was your opportunity to stick him with one of them to vote against them. In Acapulco, they went full on effigies with wooden crosses. And then once you were done voting, then Marianne Sadowski, who did a station at Plaza de la Raza, she printed these flags or these birds that said Voto Libre on the flag, American flag. So then you would cut one out as your souvenir. Here's Cecilia after the Tijuana station. She called me saying that she was gonna throw the votes over the border. Here's her. And so these are some examples of some of the stations. Unfortunately, can't show all of them, but here is a station by Brandon Bulliard at the Heidelberg Project in Detroit. So this was more of like a public art work that stayed up and open the entire time. And in the spirit of freedom, celebration of difference, and fun at the Jane Addams Hull House, I wanted to create this disco-themed environment. I knew I wanted to create a space where we could dance our protests. So I collaborated with an artist, Lisa Haller-Bagginson, on the installation, and then DJ Sadie Woods created this 24-hour playlist of protest songs. And for those who can't legally vote, Election Day becomes a day where we're invisible and silent, where we get to watch the rest of the country vote. So on this day, rather than staying silent, we decided to take up as much space as possible and to protest and dance in loud celebration. So on this day, we threw multiple parties and events throughout the station. So at Jane Addams Hull House, with artist Yvette Mayorga, we asked participants to create a piñata wall that we collectively bashed later that day. And at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago with Roberto Sifuentes and Sadie Woods, we had an election viewing party where we had multiple performances, Trump and Hillary piñatas, and a balloon drop in the middle of the museum. So these were the results of the 2016 elections. So we had more than 4,000 people vote, and Clinton won with 2,356, Trump 278, Stein got 302, Johnson 147. There was a write-in category, and Bernie Sanders was in the lead of the write-in category, and other top ones were Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, and Kanye West. I don't know if people would write that in this year. And then actually 113 no votes. So this is what the inside of the ballot looked like. So very simple, and the ballot started out with the phrase, "I'm voting here because," in 5 different languages, most spoken languages in Chicago. And what people wrote down in this part was just really moving, right? I am voting here because I am a kid. I am voting here because I was given the opportunity. I am voting here because my father was formerly incarcerated and could vote for most of his life. I'm voting here because I'm an immigrant and I can't vote anywhere. So with the 2020 elections, even with, of course, with more at stake, including the prospect of rampant voter suppression, I decided to expand the project. So I started out with creating 50 of these voting kits for the disenfranchised. So it's a collective kit of objects made by myself and other Chicago-based artists to be distributed and activate imaginative voting stations in the US and all over the world. So here's some objects that we created. So you can see on the left, that's the voting stickers for all, wristbands to say if we could vote, we would, right? Because the I voted sticker and the I voted wristbands are such symbols, right? Once for people who can vote. So we wanted to create these symbols for people who can't, right? Party is protest. So DJ Sadie Woods created a compilation of protest songs by Chicago musicians. And Aaron Delaney, who's an artist and organizer, created this actions to expand voting rights. So here's a vinyl record of the Party is Protest. So as part of the kit as well, Ishita Drop and I have a collaborative project called Cute Rage Press. And so we were looking for graphics showing who can't legally vote. We couldn't find them actually, so we decided to create our own. Artist William Estrada created these vote for our future, for our children, for our community, for those who can't. He created these posters in 8 different languages. And in the kit, you could also choose which protest banner you want, of course. And so to date, the voting kits for the disenfranchised are primarily being set up in community organizations, using classrooms for students to vote, or for them to activate their own voting stations used alongside voter registration drives activated by artists and installed in various museums, universities, and colleges. So for example, Mural Arts Philadelphia is creating a standalone voting station structure in Love Park with student generated materials that highlight histories of voting rights suppression and advocacy. With the Prison Neighborhood Arts Project, we'll be mailing unofficial ballots into Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. And this was a booth I set up yesterday at Family Affairs, which was for the Wide Awake Chicago. And in the Los Angeles area, this is Carol Zoe, and she's doing a project, Moto Voto, where she is driving around with a ballot box attached to the back of her motorcycle and collecting symbolic votes and distributing information about voter suppression and disenfranchisement in Los Angeles. And due to the pandemic and its attending concerns about accessibility and safety, in the summer, I worked with new media artist John Satram to create a virtual iteration of the voting stations titled Official Unofficial .vote. So on this website, you can follow the link to vote in order to vote in 8 different languages. For presidential candidates, you could write in your own candidates, vote on other people's write-in candidates, vote on voter issues, write in your own issues, vote on other people's issues, and express I am voting here because contributions already include suggestions to abolish ICE, abolish prison, cancel the Electoral College, arrest the police who killed Breonna Taylor, and no new Supreme Court justice until after the elections. So under the section Act, the website houses the collaborating artists projects that were all created for the voting kits for the disenfranchised with some digitization. So with like the stickers, John created an Instagram filter where you could take a selfie with your sticker. So in addition, on the section of the website, William Estrada and I developed downloadable curriculum and tools for educators to use in the classroom to engage students around disenfranchisement. So part of that PowerPoint of who can't legally vote, that is also on there in the curriculum. So what can voting look like if it were more accessible? What could voting look like if the disenfranchised could be the one to determine what shows up on the ballot? The official, unofficial voting station and all its activations creates sites of empowerment, sites for protest, sites for sharing resources, sites for social engagement and discussion, and is a collective art project making disenfranchisement visible and fighting against it in the United States. Which leads me back to imagination and action. So, imagination is that imagination is what leads to action, right? So at its best, art can work outside structures of capitalism, white supremacy, and power to imagine and create new worlds. Once we see these worlds, it's up to us to make them a part of our everyday. Imagination and dreams are the inspiration for action. We demand change because we can see and feel different and better worlds. Imagination is what gives us hope. So the seed for action are indignation for the ways things are, and imagination for the ways things can be. And my last point is that we live in a society where so many pathways to healing are cut off, corporatized, or just made inaccessible, including art. It is undeniable that art is a pathway to healing, and even if this society makes it hard for us to make art in our everyday lives, we must do so for our well-being. Making art in this moment is more important than ever. I think I will end it there.
Thank you, Aram, for that really wonderful presentation. I'm just, every time I hear you speak, I'm just blown away by the imagination and at the same time, the very deep and well-informed research that goes into your work. I want to say sorry to you and to everyone. We had just a little tech glitch at the beginning of the program with my camera, so I wasn't able to introduce you properly. And I'm really sorry for that, but thank you for rolling with it. For everyone in the audience, Aram has been so great to work with. So I've been working with her on this exhibition, the one that's currently up online, which is the Skirball's first ever digital only exhibition of the official unofficial voting station. And we're also working together on a project coming up next year, which is an exhibition at the Skirball of many of the pieces that and projects and bodies of work that you saw today in Aram's talk. And I just love how not only is she fun to work with, but she makes these conversations about serious topics really fun and imaginative, and asks these pointed questions in a really playful way. And she's truly someone who shows that art can be a tool for social change and a way to build a more just society. So like I mentioned, this exhibition is the official unofficial voting station. Voting for all who legally can't is being presented at the Skirball as part of Aram's nationwide project that's taking place this year. And asking the question in the run-up to the election, who has and who doesn't have the power to make official decisions in our democracy. So this ties into the Skirball's mission, which is to celebrate the American democratic ideals of freedom and equality, and to provoke deep reflection on these values. And that reflection leads to a more just and inclusive society. And so we're asking the question with this exhibition, what does civic participation mean when you have no official say? And I just love the image from Aram's talk of the piñata wall. And when she was talking about the events that she and her collaborators hosted in Chicago during the election in 2016. And so we've also been working with Aram this year. As she mentioned, we have been holding virtual protest banner making workshops for the Protest Banner Lending Library. And I know we've welcomed some of you in the audience to those workshops. There might be workshops in the future, so keep an eye out for that. And she'll also be doing a workshop for families that is coming up in November. So if anyone has a question for Aram that they'd like to ask, that they'd like her to answer, please drop that in the Q&A and we will get to those shortly. But before we do, we're gonna test your knowledge of voting rights in the United States. So get ready for a little pop quiz. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat bubble. It's like a little speech bubble. And so you can, if you want to, you don't have to, you can put your answers to the following questions in that chat and test what you know about voting, past and present. So we have the first question, which is, only United States citizens have ever been permitted to vote. So again, that's only United States citizens have ever been permitted to vote. You can drop your answer in the chat. All right, we're getting a couple answers, and I'll give you a couple more seconds. Think about it. All right, the answer is false. From the 1770s until right after the Civil War, the right to vote was contingent on factors other than citizenship, such as being a free white male, having resided in a state or a city for a certain length of time, owning property, or paying a certain amount of tax. And throughout the history of the United States, it's really been up to the individual states, with some exceptions, to set the requirements for and limits on who can and who can't vote. So this, we have the kind of the exception to that is the 14th and 15th Amendments, which are, the amendments to the Constitution that applied to all of the states, that granted citizenship rights to everyone born in the US, and also protecting the rights of all citizens to vote. And so these amendments declare that the right to vote won't be denied, but it doesn't restrict the vote only to citizens. So there's no national, up until 1924, there was no kind of national agreement on whether non-citizens could vote or not. So the laws changed state by state. All right, we have the next question. True or false, you can vote without a permanent home address. All right. The answer is true. You can register to vote using an address that isn't your home, such as a park, the county courthouse, a shelter, or a post office, providing service to the area where you reside, and the exact requirements vary by state. And this is really important because, of course, people who are unhoused or homeless do not have permanent home addresses. And so requiring a permanent home address to vote would effectively disenfranchise all homeless people. And this is something that Aram is highlighting in her advocacy checklists for expanding the right to vote. It was something that actually I hadn't thought a lot about until I saw that she was pointing that out. And I think it's really informative to know that, because I think a lot of people have that misconception that you must have a permanent home address. And then our last question for you, rap legend Snoop Dogg is voting for the first time in the 2020 election. He believed all his life that he couldn't vote. He wasn't allowed to vote. Why did he think that he couldn't vote? Any ideas? Any Snoop Dogg fans? Yeah, the answer about the felony convictions is true. He had a prior felony conviction, but as Aram pointed out in her talk, you can vote if you have served in California, if you've served your sentence and you have finished your parole. So different laws, state by state it varies, and some states are really strict, but in most states, after you've served your time, with the exception of like some felonies, you are allowed to vote. So that's it for our little pop quiz. Thanks for playing along. Appreciate you. And now that Aram has had a little breather, we can get to Q&A. So if you have any questions for Aram, you can drop them in the Q&A. I see a couple have come in so far. So we'll get started with those. So the first question is, what do people say about the official, unofficial voting station, like pop-ups, when they encounter them in public?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. Um, and I just did it yesterday, so I know it's fresh. Um, you know, sometimes when people walk by and I'm like, oh, do you want to symbolically vote, right? And then people are like, oh, I can't legally vote. And then I'm like, oh, wait, you can vote here, right, in this station, right? And so there is that sort of like initial like, oh wait, I can't vote, right? And like sort of a walking away or whatnot. And so, and I think yeah, I think that's an interesting response. And then I have to, or not an interesting response, it's like a learned response, right? Like as someone who can't legally vote, whenever someone's like, can you register? Do you want to register to vote? Can you want to vote or whatever, then the response is just like, no, And I think I told you this, Laura, like when I initially sent my parents the website, they also were like, I was like, oh, make sure you vote, right? It's my parents. I've been talking to them for a long time about this. And then they were like, we can't vote. We're not citizens. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? But I think, it's such like a learned reaction and a learned response, right? But I think that's why like I also try to make it super fun, and I try to, with the graphics and the aesthetics of it, make it look like super not voting, right? So that no one actually confuses it with official voting. And I do constantly use that language of like, you want to cast a symbolic vote, right? So yeah.
Does anyone ever think this is just something came into my head? Does anyone ever think that you're like doing this, that this is real, that it's like official, like people like, why are you getting people who are not, it would be illegal for these people to vote, why are you trying to get them to vote? Are you sending the votes anywhere? Like, do people get confused like on the other side?
I actually haven't really had that experience actually. Yeah, there's sometimes people will be like, what is this? So we can actually vote here? And then then I'm like, it's a symbolic vote, it's an art project, to like talk about disenfranchisement. But yeah, I actually haven't gotten a lot of that. Yeah,
that's good. I'm glad people get the message that it's symbolic, because that's an important thing. And another question that I had for you was, what have you learned through your research that surprised you the most specifically about voting rights?
Yeah, I was, like in the media around election times, you occasionally hear like people being like, oh, the disenfranchised, right? And then I was like, well, yeah, I was just like, well, who are the disenfranchised? Like, and doing that research, it wasn't easy, right? And it's not meant to be easy, right? It's meant to be confusing. In my opinion, I think it's meant to be that because it's trying to dissuade certain people from voting, right? Like Snoop Dogg, right? Or like people who are unhoused, right? Because yeah, even the system of voting is broken, right? And people don't talk about voting in that kind of way. People talk about voting as like the answer, right? But I think that the main thing that really surprised me was just like, yeah, just like how complicated all these laws are, and just like how nuanced and how on every level like disenfranchisement and also voter suppression happens, right? It's just like, it's so confusing and it's so muddy and it's so unclear, and I knew that it probably was that, but to actually like really have a hard time like finding the right numbers, or finding that like in this state is this way, but in this state is this way, it's like, it's so confusing, right?
Yeah, I think because the states have so much control, it's really, up to each individual state to make these rules, and they make the rules really complicated in some places. I think that, many people might not, especially those of us who've been able to vote our whole lives, like just don't question it. And to me, the project's been really instructive because and eye-opening, because there are really a lot of barriers in the way for people, you know, in a variety of different situations that prevent them from voting. So I want to thank you for this project. And really, I think it's done a lot, and I hope it continues to do a lot, and I hope it does a lot for our Skirball audience in opening people's eyes to understanding disenfranchisement more, and also to advocating for, you know, whatever ways in which people have different views, obviously, on, you know, who should be allowed to vote and how the right to vote should be expanded, or if it shouldn't. But I hope that it prompts deep reflection on that. We have one more question from the Q&A, and then we're going to wrap it up. And this is from one of our participants. Have you had any interesting reactions from people outside the United States?
Yeah, definitely. I think in 2016, with the stations that Cecilia and Eric did in Mexico, those were actually maybe like the most, there were like, Cecilia and Eric would send me photos, and there were like just lines going, right? Like down the block, right? Because like the gesture to vote across borders, right? The acknowledgement, there was a lot of excitement in that, to be like, oh yeah, we would love to vote in the US elections, right? Across borders, right? Because what happens in the US so greatly impacts what happens here in Mexico, right? And remember in 2016, I mean, still now, but like, so dominantly in the media was all that conversation of like, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it, right? And so, yeah, I think that stage, or those stations in particular, there was just like this like real energy and excitement to like, even though it was symbolic and everyone knew it, right? To like vote across borders, right? And have a say across borders. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, that it really, I mean, it's not just Mexico, it's the whole world, that what happens in this country that just has such a great, like a massive, massive impact. So I want to thank you again, and I want to thank everyone in the audience for being here today and taking the time out of a busy Sunday to spend time with us at the Skirball. And I want to just mention a couple of things we have coming up. And also to throw it back to Adele, who can talk to us more about a few specifics. And the first is, I mentioned this in kind of casually earlier, but we will be having studio visit classes that Aram is leading for people ages 6 and up on November 8th and 22nd. And I'll throw the sign up link in the chat for everyone in case you're interested, in case you have, well, I guess we're all, I don't know if we have any under 6 people on here, but I think that qualifies for all of us. And especially for those of you who have younger people in your lives. And I'm going to throw it back to Adele, who will tell you more about the things we've got going on at the Skirball, other things coming up during election season. So thank you.
Thank you, Aram and Laura. It was really enlightening, and I learned a lot from both of you about this process, which I've been very involved with for a long time. So I really want to thank you for bringing this to our attention today. I also want to add that we will be having a couple of programs about voting, especially on October the 13th. There will be a program about the California propositions. It is currently sold out. However, you will be able to access it on other platforms, most likely on our YouTube channel. So look for information there. And I also want to remind you that there are voting centers all over the Los Angeles area. And there will be 800 voting centers in Los Angeles where you can vote in person or drop off your mail-in ballot, including the Skirball Cultural Center. We're very proud that we will be a voting center. And I think one of the things that I learned from all of what you've been doing, Aram, and that I've been thinking about for a long time, is that voting should be fun. It shouldn't be a burden. It's a responsibility and duty, but we should be joyous about it, that we have the right and the privilege to do it. So I thank you for making it not only we understand how important it is, but that it is a fun thing to do. So thank you so much, and we'll see you probably after the election. Thank you.